Well, it's the same old from them as to why certain sectors are successful, and God bless us, they are successful, but growing lentils in Saskatchewan has absolutely nothing to do with the current government. It has everything to do with world markets, ingenuity, and good cultural practices by Saskatchewan farmers. And we're actually doing this in spite of ourselves because there's no transportation policy to go along with the production. And that goes right across the entire resource sector. You know, if you can produce all you want, but if you can't get it to your customer on time and in good condition, you've wasted your whole effort. And that's what he doesn't seem to get. In the last 8 years, when you had all of this economic money, wherewithal, opportunity, you put in place the things that are going to ensure that you get those things to market. And we have not done anything with road, rail, or special corridors to make sure it happens. The film industry broke even. It didn't cost taxpayer anything. If these other parts of the artistic community can create that many jobs, why not just put them on top of the one that was basically zeroed out for the taxpayer? Most years it at least made as much money as it cost. Some years it made a heck of a lot more. If there's other things that we can do, then you build on top. You don't cut one in order to feed the other one. It's such a, you know, we're into the debate 10 minutes already. And we've got the two people that want to be premier arguing over $7.5 million in the film industry. Okay? And if we were talking about 10 times that amount, it would be worth 10 minutes of the debate. Everyone knows that it was a mistake. Everyone accepts that. Move on. You know, that isn't going to bring back the people from Vancouver and Winnipeg and Toronto and Montreal that left this province. So get on with it, guys. Put it back in. Let them do their projects. Start fresh. We've got 9 P3 schools, and we've already ordered 180 portable classrooms to go along with them. I mean, why go through the P3 exercise? We might as well just order all portables. And, you know, did you see where the chairman of the school division outside of Saskatoon put out their budget? And he said we've got to cut over 70 teacher positions because we've been cut and we've been cut and we've been cut. And right away Morgan says, well, it's political. You're making it political. He's been warned for 2 years that if you keep cutting us, it's one of those arguments where when you make it's self-fulfilling, because what they've done is they've made the school division so large, they've taken away power of trustees to make kind of local decisions. So they've basically built super bureaucracies, much the same as health. And those people don't have the power to negotiate much of anything anymore, so they rely on the provincial grant. And then they wonder why, when you foist the P3 program on it, people get upset. Because that's just the government on high saying, this is what we're doing to satisfy our ideological bent. We're getting a little money from the feds because of it. And we're going to build these things even though we need 180 portable classrooms to go along with it. It makes no sense. It makes more sense to downsize a little bit so you still have some of that community involvement. I mean, there's only so far you can bus a kid. I mean, anyone that's going up to rural Saskatchewan knows you can't keep doing what we're doing, where you'll have multiple bus routes crossing each other and children sitting on buses for 80 and 90 minutes one way. Doesn't make any sense at all. What they should be talking about in education right now is, in a downturn, is the time that you let people upgrade. Okay, there's all kinds of people who are laid off, and and we've got a great idea where Saskatchewan would ask the feds to bring back some of the EI that people have paid over their working lives, create a fund with it. So you want to go back, you want to upgrade. When you upgrade, you become more valuable to society. You're going to be a taxpayer in a bigger way than you were before. And this is the time to let people get that education. And I haven't heard anything about people out there that are laid off and could take the opportunity to go back and further their education. Once again, it's the same old from these guys who want to beat each other up over you did, I did, you know, rather than some vision about where we want society to end up. No vision. No vision. Ideology, all kinds of it. You know, Broughton pandering to the teachers' union and Wall pandering to the right wing. Does it solve education? Not at all. But he hasn't budgeted the payments that are going to come due. Okay? He's got payments that in 2017, he's got payments in 2019 that aren't budgeted, and they're cash. Okay? You got to come up with the cash. You can't open the highway until you pay, right? And so he's got monthly payments that are not budgeted in his budget this year, next year, or the year afterwards. And no one wants to talk about it. This is a lease. No different. This is a lease. You don't even have all the land bought yet. You're going to be in court for years. You can't talk about plowing the snow till you get the land bought to build it. Well, he's a slow learner, but he finally got there. I mean, how much information did we feed this guy over the last year and a half, eh? And he just refused to.
Well, the great majority of those companies are from the province of Saskatchewan. A great number of them are from the city of Swift Current. They like that P3 project. They like the fact.
But do we like the $778,000 a month in rental that we're paying on the nursing home in Swift Current? Okay. Can we, the taxpayer, handle the $778,000, right? That is costing us to lease basically that facility. The NDP were government here for about 50 years, and our reserve system, did they get them back being self-sufficient farmers the way they were, you know, before? No. Mr. Wall has definitely not done anything because he's had a boom and he hasn't really had to worry about it. We're bringing in immigrant workers into this province because we're short in the agricultural industry, we're short in the service industry, and we're short in the construction industry. Okay? We don't have enough people. Our Aboriginal population is soon going to be 20% of our population. You know, they come from a rural background. They know what a tractor is. They know what a cow is. They know how to work with their hands. What they lack is good quality education, post-secondary education, skills training. And we simply have to do it because we can't have 20% of our population sitting idle. It just simply will not work. And we're not seeing either one of them say, I am committed to that I'm going to put agricultural training in place for on-reserve Aboriginals. I'm going to put in place a certain amount of seats in our SIAS structure and just make it happen, because if you don't, we simply can't continue on using our social system to prop up 20% of our population. It won't work. So you can appreciate your on-reserve school, what you're limited to, and if you don't have a corresponding shall we say, social structure that demands that you attend school, that disadvantage then becomes even greater. And I think one of the things that we've seen by going to the broader school divisions is that we don't have as much of that, I don't like to call it policing, but that necessity that you are going to attend school until you're at least 16 years of age. And that has to be brought back into the system, in my view. That's parental responsibility, it's societal responsibility. So I've heard none of that out of the government, you know? It used to be if we didn't show up at school, they sent the truant officer. Well, I don't think we want to do that today, but we want to make sure that people stay in school. And one of the reasons you do that is you make sure that the inequity disappears so that the opportunities are there. You're gonna want to go to school and get that education. So that has to be brought up. The root of the problem is allocation of resources, right? That's all it is. I mean, and they're not getting to the crux of it. It's a left-right thing, and it isn't anymore. Health, being sick isn't left or right. So you take whatever the resource you have and you use it most prudently, and that's why it only makes sense to get rid of these health regions. They can have these arguments about whether the riders or WCB or anybody else is using MRIs. You got to establish first that you've used the money as wisely as possible, and you're not letting a bunch of bureaucrats in health regions manage that resource, because that's what's happening right now, okay? You're getting Five Hills, you're getting other regions, feeding those patients into the Regina and Saskatoon regions because they get rewarded if they get them off their rolls and send them to where the machines are. All of the MRIs and the CT scans and all the special stuff are in the two major cities, basically. So you've got all of these games being played with shifting patients around, and they get rewarded for it, which is bizarre, okay? Doesn't make any sense. You got to get rid of that type of a system, put your dollars through the legislature, and then you can determine how many MRIs, how many CTs you need for the population that you have. Right now, that isn't being done. It's a shell game between health regions, and it doesn't make any sense. As if the NDP didn't use the crowns as backdoor taxation, the same as what the Sask Party's doing. I mean, neither one of them treat them the way they were designed by none other than Tommy Douglas, and that's a service provider. They were supposed to be the lowest cost possible service provider to make sure that, you know, we had electricity in rural Saskatchewan. That's how it all started. And today government uses them as backdoor taxation. That's why you've got built-in 5% increases in Sask Power, okay? That's why we don't have cell service in rural Saskatchewan. That's why we've got cell towers all over the place with no technology in them so that you can run a business in rural Saskatchewan. That's why you can't develop recreational opportunities in rural Saskatchewan, because they keep cherry picking the crowns. SaskTel gets their dividends stripped all the time. And neither one of these two are willing to talk about what needs to happen with, you know, those are services that make you cost effective when it comes to competing with other jurisdictions, right? Those are your core costs of any business. But if you're going to use them as backdoor taxation, then you don't get a true sense of what those services cost. And then you have the situation where you'll have a cell tower sticking up and it doesn't do anything because they won't put in the necessary electronics so that you can have I mean, you can't even do internet banking in a whole bunch of places in rural Saskatchewan. It makes no sense whatsoever. You can't market your products because you don't have those services. They aren't talking about that. You just think how much grief Brad Wall could have saved himself tonight by firing Bill Boyd. Okay? You think about it. How much grief could the Premier have avoided tonight in his conversation by getting rid of Bill Boyd? Because we all know what's happened with carbon capture, smart meters, the GTH, and these obviously questionable land deals. Mr. Boyd, everything he touches turns to dust. And the simple fact of being responsible and accountable, okay, which you're supposed to be in politics, and that the Premier should have done if he just simply dismissed this minister that has messed away so much of the taxpayers' wealth, he would have negated half of Cam Broten's arguments tonight, okay? He would have said, I did the right thing. I got rid of this person, this minister of the economy that messed all this stuff up. That makes me a good Premier. He hasn't done that, and he's left himself open to, obviously, a bunch of criticism from Mr. Broten, who's a slow learner himself. So, did you hear what he said? He said we have to have a discussion about the relationship between management and frontline. You know, finally. You know, it's finally twigging what the problem is here, okay? I mean, you can beat around the bush all you want, but the allocation of resources has always been an issue. But by not dealing with the health region bureaucracy and the size of it, up until now, there's no solutions. There's always going to be people needing more care. That's why you put the health budget through the Legislative Assembly so that you make the best choices possible. You don't leave it in the hands of people who answer to politically appointed boards, because they got there because they carried the water for either Mr. Broughton's party or Mr. Wall's party, not because they have any sense of what needs to be done for a senior citizen, okay? So you've got high-priced bureaucrats answering to political appointees, not to the taxpayer. And that's the root of the problem. There was a great editorial someone wrote recently about Royal Dutch Shell, and because they own this thing through a roundabout way, and how much money Royal Dutch Shell is worth compared to the government of Saskatchewan. But we're taking all the risk, we're doing all the work, and even marketing this thing around the world, and Royal Dutch Shell will, if it works anywhere else, will basically get the benefit of it, eh? And so why is the government of Saskatchewan, why is Sask Power out on the road peddling technology for a huge multinational who have huge vested interests in certain types of energy, okay? They're an oil and gas conglomerate worldwide, and it just really makes you wonder why they're not, as I say, we go back to the crowns again, why Sask Power has not been told in no uncertain terms that you're going to open up the grid. There's all kinds of people out there who have ideas, okay? I mean, we've got existing huge industrial complexes in this province that generate steam each and every day that have basically been told for years by Sask Power not to put cogen in. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why do you have a potash mine or a fertilizer plant or a refinery that isn't generating as much electricity as possible with the steam that's coming off of that plant? Okay? And they're all over the place. The beauty of them is that they're all across Saskatchewan. They're not concentrated in the large cities. They're all across. So you're servicing the grid in places all over the place where you need power. Instead of, like right now, coal's all concentrated in the south, and you've got to move it all the way to the north, right? But we have large industrial complexes all over the province in rural areas where they can provide lots of good employment if they add on to, and cogen is one of those things. The greenhouse initiative that we talked about is just part and parcel of that, because you're just, once it goes through the turbine, then it goes into the greenhouse, right? You're just further using a resource that's already paid for. The water's already been paid for by every one of those resource people, okay? And yet Sask Power isn't opening the grid up to accept this innovation, and I don't understand it. We have never had in place a royalty review structure that was mandated. This was always something that's done in the back room with cabinet, and that's why several years ago the PC party put forward a proposal that there would be an automatic royalty review every 4 years, not by politicians, not by cabinet ministers, but by people who are experts in the field of the various resources that we have. And they would simply table a snapshot in time with the Legislative Assembly in the middle of the term of whatever government was in power. And everybody could see it. Okay, the public sees it, the companies see it. It doesn't recommend that you're necessarily going to change anything. It just gives you that snapshot in time of where our royalty picture is versus other people and what it's contributing to our society, okay? And you would simply take the politics out of it. They would be servants of the legislature. So it wouldn't be filtered through a cabinet minister into the House. Every MLA, regardless of party, would get to see the report, take it back to people in their constituency, have a discussion about it, and that way we would know whether we're getting a fair return or we're not getting a fair return. And no surprises to industry. Industry doesn't want surprises, okay? They have multi-million, billion-dollar investments over long periods of time, so they don't need knee-jerk reactions. But when it's public like that, then everybody knows where the game's at, okay? And I think that's one of the beauties of of what Norway has done. Yes, there's coal plants being built around the world, but there's also nuclear facilities being built around the world. There's huge solar farms being built all around the world, and we're talking big. I mean, you go into California and Nevada and Arizona, and we're talking hundreds of acres of solar panels. And we're talking about pretty poor countries going to nuclear because they understand the climate change stuff as much. I mean, look at India. You know what rising water will do to a country like India, where the whole Ganges Delta could be, you know, inundated. But they're also producing a lot of nuclear power, and it's a zero emitter. We're one of the lowest cost producers of uranium in the world, okay? At the very least, our premier should be saying to the federal government that the refining capacity for uranium in Canada should be moved to Saskatchewan. This is where it's produced. It isn't produced in Ontario anymore. So the refining, the mining, the refining, and processing of that should all be in this province. And when you do that, then that opens up other opportunities to look at how we can possibly generate electricity in a more cost-effective way with uranium. And no talk of it, none. They're afraid of it.
Reason why they're not?
They're afraid of it. They're afraid of having the discussion. And what's the Legislative Assembly about anyway? You know, I'm not afraid to talk about it. I never was. I mean, as a minister responsible, I took Cameco to the marketplace, right? You know, it's a worldwide company today. It operates around the world. It supplies, you know, countries everywhere with nuclear capability. Why don't we enhance that, okay? And I know Mr. Broughton has supporters that get all scared, you know, that they might somehow glow in the dark. But if we're serious, if we're deadly serious about climate change, and I think we all are, we understand we got to do things differently, then at least have the discussion. Don't wipe it off the table because you have some philosophical bent about it. Have the discussion, and that isn't happening. It doesn't happen in these debates, and that's a disservice to the voter. If you don't have the courage to talk about it here, how are you ever going to implement change? No, because you get into the one-upmanship of this style of thing doesn't really problem solve. It's good theater sometimes, but if you want to have a discussion about how you govern this province, then you would have had all five. And you would have had more policy, okay? You wouldn't have addressed as many issues, but I think you could have got to the meat of it. You know, you define it down to maybe healthcare, education, climate change, and jobs. Okay, 4 categories, and you would get through your 5 leaders, and I think you would come up with some really good ideas, because like what we talked about with getting oil wells back up and running, or using waste heat, Aboriginal employment and agriculture, those kind of things would get the do instead of what you saw there. I mean, how many of those issues, quite frankly, aren't relevant?
Too many details.
Well, I mean, you ended up with, what, 4 shouting matches on what are really minor things. I mean, yeah, government planes, but really, at the end of the day, whether we fly by a government-owned Cheyenne or a privately owned Cheyenne, to the taxpayer of this province, it's not a big deal. But whether you've got air ambulance is, you know, because STARS and air ambulance are huge if you're in a rural place. So yeah, it gets all mixed up, and then you don't, and I think you could still have the theater with the bigger spectrum, eh? I mean, 12 Republicans with some really, really wingnutty people, and they manage it, okay? They manage the public process. And everybody appreciates the fact that democracy got served, right? As crazy as some of those people can be, democracy got served. Why wouldn't you want the same thing here? Pretty weak.